Hello everybody, so today we're going to be talking about the Nasdaq with specific reference to whales. And the Lord has been highlighting and sharing with me lots of downloads regarding whales and how the whales are going to end up taking Joseph to his destiny. Prophetic word given on the 25th of June 2024. The whales prophecy. I am the God of second chances. As Jonah was given a second chance, so too will Joseph be given a second chance. The whale took Jonah to his destiny, so too will the whales take Joseph to his destiny. The ships on the sea will have trouble, while the whales will be safe. Joseph will be safe as he is amongst the whales. The waters will be greatly troubled. And then I heard the word turbulence. Watch the whales, for they shall surely take Joseph to his destiny. And then the prophecy ended. So the Lord was making a comparison between Jonah and Joseph, but in this instance he was saying to me that the whales are going to take Joseph to his destiny in the same way that Jonah was taken to his destiny by a whale. And so the Lord was saying that everyone should watch the whales, because the whales are going to take Joseph to where he's supposed to be. And there's a few things that I wanted to highlight when I was meditating after the Lord gave me this prophecy. There's a few things I wanted to highlight. The first is that the sailors in the book of Jonah, if you read the story, the sailors cast lots to see who was causing the storm. And I've recently been given a dream about casting lots. And so the Lord was reaffirming to me that this particular prophecy is also tied into a dream that I had recently about casting lots. And just as Jonah, the whale took Jonah to his destiny, the Lord was saying that the cryptocurrency whales are going to take Joseph to his destiny. And God turned the sea, the storm that was in the sea, around for favouring his servant Jonah. So he favoured his servant Jonah. And one point to remember is that whales have dominion over the waters. So the whales have dominion. And the Lord is likening the dominion of the waters, that the waters will not overcome Joseph. The waters will not overcome Joseph, even though the waters will be greatly troubled. And the waters will overcome some ships. Some ships will succumb to the catastrophe of the waters. But the water is a native environment for the whale, and the whale can handle whatever trouble the waters might bring. If anything, the whale will thrive in turbulence. And the Lord was saying that just as Jonah found a safe haven in the whale, so too will Joseph find safe haven in the cryptocurrency whales. So the Lord was saying to watch the whales. He was very specific, because the whales will surely take Joseph to his destiny. And so that was the end of the prophetic word for whales. The Lord would like me to speak about, because it ties into the casting of lots dream that I had recently, but also it ties into the whales. The Lord would like me to speak about the Nasdaq, with specific reference to the God of the Nasdaq. Now, before we look at the God of the Nasdaq, what the Lord highlighted to me is that the Nasdaq is not just in America. If I had to ask you, where is the Nasdaq? Most people would say in New York, and that would be half the answer, right? That would be half the answer being correct. The Nasdaq is actually in America and in Europe. So let's explore this concept before we look at the God of the Nasdaq. So typically the answer that one would give regarding where the Nasdaq is would be, it would be likened to the New York Stock Exchange. And that, like I said, would be half the answer. So in New York City, there is a Nasdaq, right? If you go to Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange is also owned by the Nasdaq. There is a stock exchange in this area, and there is also a Federal Reserve in this area. That's something that you should pay attention to. And that ends the exchanges that are in America for the Nasdaq. So New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, right? The Nasdaq has also got international stock exchanges. And the first we look at is in Sweden. Now, what's important to note about this particular Nasdaq is that the Stockholm Stock Exchange is owned by the Nasdaq. What is also interesting to me about this is that the Lord gave me a dream about Sweden and Ripple and the casting of lots. It is only recently that I discovered that there is a Nasdaq in Sweden. The Nasdaq is also in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and recently we saw the burning down of this particular stock exchange in Copenhagen. And when the stock exchange burnt down, the Lord showed me that Europe is ready. We'll go into greater detail regarding the stock exchange in a moment. The stock exchange is also in Finland. The Nasdaq is also in Finland. It's also in Iceland, the Nasdaq. It is also in Riga. And the Nasdaq is also in Lithuania. So, as you can see, the Nasdaq is not just in America. The Nasdaq is also in Europe. When the European Stock Exchange, which is owned by the Nasdaq in Copenhagen, burnt down, so this particular one here in Copenhagen burnt down, the Lord was showing me that Europe is ready. So within Europe, there are 7 exchanges that belong to the Nasdaq. What is interesting to note, and what every listener must pay attention to, is that each of these stock exchanges owned by the Nasdaq sits on a water body. So wherever there is water, there seems to be a Nasdaq. New York has water surrounding it. Philadelphia has a waterway. and most of these European ones sit on the water as well. This is very important because the Lord wanted me to highlight who the God of the Nasdaq is. So we need to pay attention to location. They are sitting on the waters, right? And this is symbolic because water represents liquidity. The Nasdaqs take their dominion from the water or the liquidity of the market. Now, what the Lord wanted me to share is that there is a consolidation of power. And when there is a movement within these sister stock exchanges, when there is a casting of lots and there is a decision for the switch to be flipped, there will be a coordination between these stock exchanges because there is a consolidation of power. And pay attention to Copenhagen, because Copenhagen is the one that burnt down recently in April when there was the solar eclipse over America. And also pay attention to Stockholm, because this is where I had my dream about Ripple. What the Lord wanted me to highlight is that this consolidation of power is really a consolidation of ancient bloodlines. These people who own these particular stock exchanges or run these particular stock exchanges, it's a consolidation of ancient bloodlines and ancient power. These ancient bloodlines who control the liquidity or who control the currency or who control the waters, because the Nasdaq sits on the water, it sits on liquidity. These ancient bloodlines worship an ancient deity. Now, you may not believe this, but what I'm about to teach you is in the Bible, it is biblical, and they believe it. So it doesn't matter what the general population believe. They believe it. They worship an ancient deity. The Bible teaches that there's nothing new under the sun. And so we're going to explore the ancient deity that is worshipped by the ancient bloodlines that is really the God of the Nasdaq. The God of the Nasdaq can be found in the book of Judges and in the book of Samuel in the Bible. He is also the God of the waters. Remember, the Nasdaq sits on the water. It takes control or charge of the liquidity. And this ancient god, which is a fish god, it is native to the water. Right? It is native to liquidity. It is the god of prosperity. Right? It is the god of prosperity. If you go to Wikipedia and you look up Dagon, which is the god of prosperity, it is also the god that was worshipped by the Philistines in the Old Testament. It is the god that was worshipped by the Philistines. And who were the Philistines? The Philistines were Goliath was a Philistine, and Goliath was a giant. Right? So if we look at the Strong's Concordance, H1709, it will take you to the Blue Letter Bible, and there you can see the derivation of the water god, which is mentioned in the book of Judges and in the book of Samuel, who was worshipped by the Philistines, the deity Dagon. And he is native to the waters. He is half fish, half man. In other words, a fish god or a mermaid. To break it down, Dagon, who is the god of the water, or the god of the Philistines, is the god of the giants, because Goliath was a giant, and the giants were the Nephilim. The Nephilim believe in hybridization. If you read the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 6 speaks about how there was hybridization in the days of Noah, a mixing of man and fish. So this particular god, which was a mixture of man and fish, had dominion over the water, or the liquidity. He was the god of prosperity. According to this particular Wikipedia page, he is the god of prosperity. But he was also a hybrid god, right? Hybridization, so a mixing of man and fish. Let's visit the Copenhagen Stock Exchange for a moment, which is owned by the Nasdaq. So in other words, it is a European Nasdaq. This particular stock exchange burnt down in April. When it burnt down, the Lord showed me that Europe was ready. And this particular stock exchange, to give you an example and an illustration, sits on the water. It sits on the water, and all throughout this particular country, if I've got Danish people who are watching this particular presentation, they will attest to the fact that this particular god is all over their country. This Mer man or Mer woman, this god is a principality in this country. It is where the story The Little Mermaid originates from. Hans Christian Andersen takes his inspiration from this particular country, where he writes about the mixture of a woman and a fish, or the queen of the sea. The Bible speaks about the principality Dagon, which is the king of the sea, and in Denmark, where the stock exchange sits on the water, you have these deities all along the banks of this particular country. And what is interesting to note is that the elite or the ancient bloodlines who have consolidated their power, right, they have consolidated their power using the Nasdaq. These ancient bloodlines who worship this hybrid god believe in hybridization or transgender or transhumanism. So they believe in a mixture. Here you'll see the spirit behind the transgender movement, or the hybridization of man, male and female, is the deity. They're paying homage to the deity which is mentioned in the Bible as Dagon, or the mixing of man and fish. So these ancient bloodlines worship a transgender god. The Baphomet is transgender, right? And you will notice that they pledge their allegiance, these very ancient bloodlines who own these companies, they pledge their allegiance directly or indirectly to their god by advertising, right, their allegiance. These very elite, wealthy companies will pledge their allegiance to their hybrid god, right? And the spirit behind it, or the god behind it, is that of the mer, the merchant, the mermaid, the merchant, trading and prosperity. There is their god. The Nephilim, right? The Nephilim mentioned in Genesis 6. And the company that is responsible, or the charity rather, that is responsible for transitioning young children from male to female and from female to male by using puberty blockers, the charity that was overseeing that was called My Mermaids. Here you can see the tail of the mermaid in the M. And behind this particular charity we have the Tavistock Institution, which was the medical arm for the NHS, who was fulfilling these particular prescriptions to change children from male to female, to transgender the youth. Tavistock is known, if you do your research, Tavistock is known for using their campaign, using propaganda to sway the narrative of the current generation. They've been doing it since World War I, and they're still doing it now. They use propaganda, advertisements, television, Netflix, a variety of means to program people through the television on how they should think. And they're revealing who it is that they worship, because in the next generation they want the children to be transgender or transhuman, because these companies worship the Baphomet or the Nephilim or Dagon, who was in and of himself a hybrid, a hybridization, and that is why God flooded the earth when in the days of Noah. But the Bible speaks about, Jesus says in the Bible, in the New Testament, how before he returns we will have the days of Noah, right, which is a mixing. And here you can see that Tavistock and mermaids are really bedfellows, one and the same thing, or one hiding behind the other. So the God of these companies, with a lot of wealth and a lot of clout, a lot of money, is Dagon, or here you can see Starbucks, it's also the mermaid. It is all one and the same thing. The mermaid, here is the tail, and here is the movement. Mermaids unite in protest. Right? This is the god of the Nasdaq. This is the same god where the Nasdaq burnt down in Copenhagen, Denmark, and these mermaids sit on the banks. They sit on the banks of this particular country where the stock exchange burnt down. And it is the god of prosperity. Dagon in the Bible is the god of prosperity. And it is no wonder that these ancient bloodlines worship this ancient deity. Now, one of the prophetic words that the Lord gave for 2024 was that Joseph is to be a gatekeeper. In order to be an effective gatekeeper, you need to understand where the Nasdaq sits, why it sits where it sits, and who it is that they worship. Because when the Lord establishes you and makes you evergreen under his covenant of being evergreen, you will rub shoulders with giants. You will rub shoulders with people who own these companies that are on the Nasdaq. And it is imperative that you understand their origin, or what it is that they are themselves gatekeeping in secret. And turn to the Bible for wisdom. In the book of Judges, when Samson is captured, it speaks about how the Philistines or the giants worshipped Dagon or praised Dagon. Remember, Goliath was a Philistine, he was a giant. In the book of Samuel, they took the Ark of the Covenant, right, and they placed it in Dagon's temple. And we'll speak about 1 Samuel 5 in a moment. So the stock exchange in Copenhagen recently burnt down, right? And if you have ever visited this country, these are the creatures that are along the banks. The Queen of the Sea sits on the river banks. She is the principality that is sitting on the liquidity or the banks. Right? The Bible speaks about in Ephesians 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of this dark world, spiritual wickedness in high places. You must understand, in order to be effective in spiritual warfare, the first thing you need is revelation, understanding, and then application of the revelation and understanding that you do have. This is another deity in this country where the Nasdaq is, right? In Copenhagen, this is another deity. It's the Nephilim sitting on the river banks, or a hybrid mermaid, right? A mermaid slash human hybridization that is taking dominion of the liquidity. And this is another popular statue in Copenhagen where the Nasdaq is, right? In the waters, they've displayed the marine kingdom dominating the liquidity, a kingdom underneath the sea, dominating the liquidity. If you go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 26, verse 15 to 17, it speaks about in verse 16 all the princes of the sea, right? There's a kingdom, the princes of the sea. In order to have a kingdom, you need a king, a queen, a prince, a princess. Like in the United Kingdom, we have kings and queens. It is a kingdom, right? The same is true with the sea. The sea has a kingdom because in a kingdom you have princes, but you also have queens. Queens and kings. Right? So it's there. If you read the Bible line upon line, precept upon precept, concept upon concept, the Holy Spirit is faithful to give you the wisdom that you need. So the Little Mermaid, where Disney takes its inspiration from, is from this particular country, right? The story of the Little Mermaid is from the same country, but they should stop calling it the Little Mermaid. They should call it the Nephilim. Call it what it is, right? Because when you call it what it is, it does not become as innocent as Disney portrays it to be. Disney has dumbed down a very demonic concept to brainwash children into marine witchcraft, because the marine kingdom is part and parcel of it is a lot of witchcraft. So the gods of the giants in the Bible was Dagon. Dagon was a mermaid or a siren. And they are not innocent, cute creatures. They are highly demonic creatures. And like I said, you may not believe this, but the ancient bloodlines who have taken dominion over the water or the liquidity, they believe these things. They believe it so much so that they are willing to advertise in a way that is openly endorsing a Baphomet or a hybrid god. And so what the Lord wanted me to share is that Jesus took dominion over the water by walking on it. This is a miracle that Jesus performed during his ministry while he was here on earth. He took dominion over the water. And so as we are seated in Christ, we have dominion over these things. In the same way, in the New Testament, in the book of Samuel, it speaks about how they put the Ark of the Covenant adjacent to Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen on his face before the Ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen on his face before the Ark of the Lord, with his face and his hands broken off and lying on the threshold. Only the torso remained. Hallelujah! So Dagon's head was severed. Right? The Lord removed his headship. When you're looking at symbology in the Bible, head means you ruling or you reigning. You're the head of something. You're a leader. But here clearly in the Old Testament, the Lord demonstrates that he decapitates Dagon in his presence in the Ark of the Covenant. Dagon is decapitated. His power and authority is removed. And similarly, when Jesus walks on water, he demonstrates his power and authority over the waters or over the principalities of the water, because they are under his feet. He is the head. Jesus Christ is the head. Right? And when we are seated in him, we have headship over these things. So if you're interested in concepts like this, I have co-collaborated a book which is now available in the GoshenFoundation.com, the shop, and if you can pray about it, it's not a book for everybody. Be led to invest and have this in your library. The ancient bloodlines and the ancient deities won't readily share this information. And what the Lord showed me is that for every Joseph to have dominion on the earth, they need to have a underpinning of such concepts, to know where the origin of certain things are, so that we can be the head over such matters, as Jesus demonstrated his lordship as he walked on water. And so pray about if you should invest in this book and have it in your library. My ministry does not have enough funds to print the paperback as yet, and so only the digital copies are available. But I wanted to end with this, that as the enemy has his tail, because you can see there's a tail here in the mermaid logo, as the enemy has his way of doing things, right? There is always a counter narrative where God is using the very things that the enemy might use as well to bless his people. And so here you see the tail of a whale. And God showed me that the whales are going to bless Joseph. So we will see provision through the whale, right? The enemy has what he's doing, but God has his way of changing things to bless his people. And so watch the whales, as the Lord said to me. Because in Deuteronomy verse 28 it says that you will lend to many nations but borrow from none. The Bible makes it clear that we will be the head and not the tail. We will be the head and not the tail. And just how Dagon was beheaded, right, to show that the authority is really coming from the great I am, Yahweh. In the same way, the Lord gives us headship over these things that wish to make us the tail. You see, the enemy wishes to make us the tail, but we will not be the tail. The very thing that they thought would make us the tail is the thing that will take us to our destiny, just as Jonah was taken to his destiny in the belly of the whale. So I wanted to thank you very much if you supported my ministry by buying the book. I pray that it blesses you. And to everybody else, if you've made it right to the end, thank you very much for watching. Shabbat Shalom.
Shoulders.
But before we get into the prophetic word for today, I would like to show you guys a project that I've been working on for the past few months with my husband. What the whales think about and what the whales do and what the whales know. Hope I've got all that right. So, if you're called to be a whale and you'd like to retain your whale status, then the Lord would have us release this book to bless you so that you can have an underpinning of the knowledge that most whales would understand. And when I'm speaking about whales, I'm talking about the people who are really at the top tier, not new wealth. I'm talking about old wealth, the people who have had wealth for centuries and generations. They will know the information that is contained in this book, and they will treat the information in this book as something that is closely guarded and not something that is spoken about amongst people who are not within the reference or the frame of reference of their level of wealth. And so it's to edify and equip. The book's not for everybody. It's only for Josephs, who the Lord has called, and it's because it's not for everybody. I know that might sound terribly harsh, but it's not for everybody. It's for specific people who are called to be whales. So with that said, if that doesn't relate to you, feel free to ignore that particular piece of information, and we'll go into the prophecy now that the Lord gave me regarding whales. This particular prophecy is not in the book, and it's very timely. The book is timely, but also the prophecy about whales is timely. And so I pray this presentation blesses you guys. Thank you very much for watching. Shabbat Shalom.